Michael Avenatti is fighting back. The celebrity attorney was released on a $300,000 bond last night, and he is bashing the federal charges that he allegedly attempted to extort over $20 million from Nike. Avenatti writing on Twitter, quote, "We never attempted to extort Nike, and when the evidence is disclosed, the public will learn the truth about Nike's crime and cover-up." Nike has not been accused of any wrongdoing in this investigation at this time, we should note. But here to break this down with us is Romano Law Managing Attorney Domenic Romano. Domenic, thanks for being here. What's your take on the way that we're seeing this play out now in the court of public opinion, I guess, as Avenatti is pushing back?
Well, you know, it's interesting. This morning, he's saying that Nike is attempting to divert from the crimes that they've committed. That's funny, because his tweeting all morning seems to divert from the other charges that Avenatti has also been indicted on, and that is namely the bank and wire fraud. So allegedly, in addition to this extortion attempt, he basically made false statements, increasing his income, inflating his income to a bank to get a $50 million loan, $54 million, I believe it was. And the IRS investigators that had been following him for months knew that this information was fraudulent because the tax returns that he provided as evidence had never been filed. So remarkable at that. And then the other case in California where he took $1.6 billion that one of his clients in an intellectual property settlement was awarded and kept them in his attorney account and diverted them for his own, as prosecutor said, to promote his own personal lifestyle and to help his coffee brand.
Yeah. I just want to ask you, with kind of your background in law, if you've ever seen a case with some of the things that are being alleged here, that someone would go in essentially to one of the largest companies and say, "Pay me, or your company, quote, I could die."
It's not the typical way that you would think that a whistleblower claim would really be laid out here to a major corporation.
It's not settled in any way. He asked for $1.5 million for his client and between $20 and $25 million for himself and his co-conspirator to do an investigation, an internal investigation, in return for his silence. So this goes way beyond zealously representing your client and goes to self-interest. And for someone who should know better, someone familiar with the law. And it's interesting to note this is the second time this year, so far in 2019, where there's been a very high-profile extortion attempt that's backfired. You have the Jeff Bezos attempt on Jeff Bezos by AMI, and now you have this allegation against on behalf of Nike.
Why do you think that is? What is it about kind of where we're at right now that these extortion claims are just, you know, kind of coming out as a to your point, early trend in 2019?
I think there's more awareness that the investigators and people won't tolerate it. Companies will not tolerate individuals. Jeff Bezos, he's not going to tolerate being boxed into a corner and being owned by the National Enquirer. Nike is not going to be owned by Avenatti. They'll have their own day probably if some of what Michael Avenatti is saying is true. They'll have their own answers to provide, but they won't be beholden to criminals, essentially, alleged criminals.
So Domenic, what's the next steps in these types of cases? What should we prepare to see next here?
I think we should prepare to see more of the evidence. Apparently there are recordings that the FBI made. This whole case, then the extortion, the Nike case, apparently went down in the last week or so. And they arrested.
It's incredible, that timetable there. That's very, very quick, isn't it?
We're living in a new age, right? The age of social media. So he tweets out, he's sitting in Nike's attorney's offices in Manhattan. He sends out a tweet. And 14 minutes later, he's arrested in those very offices. FBI people come and they take him over.
Things move quick these days. Beth, we got to note you're on the Nike board. I don't know what you're allowed to say, but just in terms of the allegations that we're seeing and the way this case is played out, anything to weigh in on that?
I don't have the ability to say a lot, but I was proud at how quickly Nike reacted, how vehemently, and I'm not surprised.
Yeah, it was.
You know, stay tuned.
It was very fast. That is a good point to raise here. All of this played out on our show, no less, yesterday when we were talking about this. The tweet to the amount of time that we saw all of this move forward was very, very quick. All right, Domenic Romano, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time.